welcome to M2. This week we're continuing our series on Doubt It, and I want to start off with a quick game of Never Have I Ever. So I want you guys to just take a look at these questions and answer them on your own. And here's one more question for you guys that'll kind of lead into our next part. Have you ever heard that following Jesus would make everything in your life okay? There's a Bible verse in Romans 8:28 that tells us in everything God works for our good. Some people like to interpret this as meaning if I follow Jesus, everything will just be great, everything will be fine and awesome for the rest of my life. But I think we all know from our experiences and even from the questions you just answered that isn't always true. Even when we follow Jesus, we don't get everything we want, we still get hurt, and bad things can still happen to us. So go ahead and take a look at these next questions that have to do with praying to God and hoping that He'll give us the outcome that we desire. Alright, next up, let's just take a look at a man whose life is pretty much an extended version of Alexander's terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. Just take a look at these couple verses, these couple chapters, read them, and answer the questions that'll be on the screen. In Job 3, after everything he experienced, he cries out to God and asks, why is this happening? He's done his best to follow God and couldn't understand why God was allowing him to suffer the way that he was. Then in Job 4 through 37, the chapters 4 through 37, Job had 3 friends who tried to comfort him through all of this pain, but after sitting with Job for a week, they decided that they had an answer to Job's questions about why all of this was happening to him. Except their answers were pretty bad. They were offensive and hurtful, actually. Here's what they told Job. This is your fault. Bad things don't happen to innocent people, so you must be guilty of something. They told him your kids deserved it too. They told him God has a plan, you just have to wait and see what it is. That's not really comforting or helpful when you're grieving the loss of your entire family and everything that you've known. They also told him to just be thankful. God must be disciplining you for something. Be grateful that it's not worse. And that's pretty terrible, but we don't hear things like don't we hear things like this all the time? Maybe we've even said it to someone else. These friends of Job go on lecturing him for a really long time, about 30 or 40 chapters worth of a long time. When they're done, Job finally tells them, hey, everything you've said has been really hurtful and offensive, and you're wrong. Job says he hasn't sinned against God, but even if he had, nothing he's done would deserve the kind of suffering he's experiencing. Job cries out in pain, asking God to just end his suffering already because it's all too much for him. And then in Job 38 through 41, finally God responds. God appears and speaks to Job out of a great whirlwind. He speaks to Job out of this great, incredible whirlwind. What do you think God's going to say?
Job is innocent.
He is.
he's also on an emotional roller coaster. At some moments, he's very confident that God is still wise and just.
Yeah, in other moments, he's doubting God's goodness.
He even comes to accuse God of being reckless, unfair, and corrupt. So by the end of the dialogues, Job demands that God come and explain himself in person, and God does so. He comes in the form of a great storm cloud.
Now, God doesn't give Job a direct answer. He doesn't tell Job about the conversation with the Satan.
Yeah, he does something very different. He takes Job on a virtual tour of the universe. He shows Job how grand the world is, and he asks him if he's even capable of running it or understanding it, just for a day. He shows Job how much detail there is in the world, things that we might see every day, but really don't understand at all. But God does. He knows it all intimately. He pays attention to the beauty and operations of the universe in ways that we haven't even imagined and in places that we will never see.
Then to conclude, God shows Job two wondrous beasts and brags about how great they are.
Yeah, they are dangerous. I mean, they would kill you without even thinking about it. And God says they're not evil. They're actually a part of his good world.
And then that's it. That's God's whole defense. It's kind of weird. I mean, what was this all about?
It seems to be this. From Job's point of view, it looks like God is not just. But God's perspective is infinitely bigger. He's dynamically interacting with a whole universe of complexity when he makes decisions. And this is what God calls his wisdom.
So Job asking God to defend himself is actually kind of absurd.
He couldn't comprehend this kind of complexity even if he wanted to.
So where does this leave us?
Well, it leaves Job in a place of humility. He never learned why he suffered, and yet he's able to live in peace and in the fear of the Lord.
After all of that, God didn't even answer Job's question. Job wanted to know why so many terrible things had happened to him, but God didn't answer him, or at least not in the way that Job expected. Job asked why, and God responded with, "I'm the creator of everything. I'm bigger, greater, more powerful, and kinder than you could ever imagine. You are so small compared to me." Job didn't get the answer he was looking for, but he did get an encounter with the creator of the universe, and that was enough for Job. If you are dissatisfied with how the story ends, I get it. I used to feel the exact same way too, and to be honest, I still do sometimes. When horrible things happen, I still want God to tell me why they are happening. It's hard to have faith when you're experiencing something difficult like that you just can't understand or explain. And that's okay. That's the point of Job's story. 2 weeks ago, we said that you're not alone in your questions. And like last week, we said God doesn't shame us for our questions. God never condemned Job for asking why, because God understands our pain. And now in Job's story, we learn a third important thing about our questions and doubts. Our questions don't always get answered. So just take a look at this next set of questions and just take some time reflecting on them. So at the end of Job's story, God restores Job's life by giving him double everything he had before. But that doesn't take away the pain and the suffering that Job had to experience. So let's return to the passage that I mentioned earlier, the one that people sometimes think means everything will just work out fine. And that's Romans 8:28, which says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." This verse doesn't mean that our lives will eventually have a happy ending like our favorite Disney movie. When we experience pain and heartache, the hard truth is that our questions just don't always get answered, but God can redeem what we have suffered or lost. So we may not be able to avoid pain, we may not be able to fix it, we may never even know why it happened, but here's what we do know. God promises to redeem our stories so that we can know God better, so that we can help others and make the world a better place, and so that we can become more like Jesus. So if you find yourself suffering seemingly without reason, I hope you won't take the advice of Job's friends, and instead I hope you'll learn to trust knowing that the God who made you is even better and more important than knowing the why. We may not know how everything is going to work out, or even if it will work out, but even when we don't have every answer to every question, we can still have faith in our Redeemer, and that is good news. So now I want you to just take some time to think about a time or times in your life where you've experienced something difficult, but God redeemed it. And you might not come up with a story, you might not remember things that had a happy ending. It might have been one of those instances where God redeemed it, but not in the way you were expecting. But just take some time this week to kind of think about those situations and to thank God for the fact that even though we don't have all the answers, He is so much greater than any answers we could ask for.